Hi, folks. I don't think it's news to anyone that Democrats aren't just out of their minds, they're straight up deranged. The left is so allergic to reality, they'll firebomb a Tesla dealership while preaching about renewable energy. These are the same folks who yell, "Love wins," and are now chasing Christians and families through Seattle like it was a scene from The Purge, pronoun edition. And don't worry, Seattle PD eventually stepped in because nothing says tolerance like needing a police escort to leave a Christian rally. Today, we're diving into a string of moments that lay bare the cracked mirror of modern progressivism, where violence is speech, speech is violence, and truth is whatever makes the loudest activist feel seen. So strap in. We're about to roast some ideological tofu.
Again, 23 people are now in custody after the catastrophe and really all the destruction today. Going forward, we are told that all those people arrested could face charges of both obstruction and assault. As for what occurred, counter-protesters showed up here speaking out against a concert organized by a group called On Fire Ministries, a religious pro-life group that promotes a two-gender ideology, with critics, though, calling it anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ. In response to everything that happened, one of the counter-protesters told us she is angry with the city for allowing this concert to even happen here, while one of the actual concert goers says she means no harm. This is what they both told us earlier.
The city, instead of having them do this downtown, decided this was a good location for them. Thanks, City of Seattle.
I'm not trying to tell you what to do, what nothing. It's none of my business. I'm not here to judge. But Jesus loves you so much.
As you can see in some of the footage that we brought you, at the height of today's unrest, dozens of police officers were needed to get everything under control, and that eventually did happen. After about 2 hours of skirmishes, peaceful protests happened as that concert did go on as had been planned. Now, as far as right now, we have not gotten any reports of anyone being seriously injured in the clashes today. In fact, the only known injury was to a police officer. That officer was taken to the hospital and has since been released. Coming to you live from Capitol Hill tonight.
Let's talk about what really happened in Seattle, because it wasn't just a protest, it wasn't just a clash of opinions, it was a cultural collision between a fading progressive narrative and a rising resistance to it. A peaceful Christian concert was held at City Hall, yes, the public square. And what did it provoke? Not civil debate, not a counter concert, but rage, screaming mobs, assault, one police officer injured, 23 arrests, and a crowd of self-declared anti-fascists chasing Christians around a government building like it was some kind of ritual purge. You'd think Seattle was under siege from a cult, and it actually is. But here's a kicker. The people causing the chaos are the ones claiming they're oppressed and are the ones who are the actual cult. But let's peel back for a second. The event was hosted by On Fire Ministries, a group that affirms the truth of natural law, male and female. That's not an ideology, by the way. It's biology, it's scripture, and it's been understood for all of human history. But listen to how the media framed the segment. In the newscast, they claimed the group promotes a two-gender ideology as if recognizing reality as some novel political stance. This is how the left manipulates language. They rebrand the natural order as extremism while pretending their ever-mutating alphabet theology is settled science. By calling it an ideology, the media smuggles in bias under the radar, casting truth as dangerous and dissent as violence. Then, without skipping a beat, they parrot the activist script, calling it anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ. No defense of free speech, no effort at fairness, just ideological reinforcement, massive journalism. This is why trust in media is collapsing, not because they scream lies, but because they whisper them. And by the way, this is what happens when a movement runs out of emotional absolutism. You can't reason with it because it's not built on reason. It's built on the belief that words are weapons and silence is violence. But apparently, only when those words challenge progressive dogma. A pride flag is treated like holy scripture, but scripture itself, well, that's grounds for protest. So how do we get here? It wasn't overnight. The left has spent decades embedding itself in our cultural institutions, media, education, entertainment, and redefining tolerance to mean obedience. We're now at the stage where diversity means everyone must think the same, and inclusion means excluding anyone who believes in objective truth. This didn't happen because the right overreached. It happened because the left was never told no. They're like petulant children. They were told their feelings were facts, that disagreement was harm, that every cultural space should reflect their worldview, and now, when they don't get their way, they riot, and they ironically call that justice. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about one concert. It's a litmus test for where the country stands. And what we saw in Seattle, is that despite the tantrums, despite the shouting, despite the intimidation, Christian Americans still showed up. They sang, they prayed, they stayed, and the state, at least for once, did its job and protected them. But it doesn't seem like it's doing that willfully, because look at what the mayor of Seattle said.
Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell is shedding some light on some of this. He released a statement on the events at Cal Anderson Park later after that incident happened. It says in part that Seattle is proud of our reputation as a welcoming, inclusive city for the LGBTQ plus communities, and we stand with our trans neighbors when they face bigotry and injustice. Today's far-right rally was held here for this very reason, to provoke a reaction by promoting beliefs that are inherently opposed to our city's values. In the heart of Seattle's most prominent LGBTQ plus neighborhood, the mayor then went on to claim that anarchists infiltrated the counter-protester group, and that inspired violence, prompting the police to make arrests and ask organizers to shut down, which they did, although we heard from Ryan that that concert did continue. He is directing the Parks Department to review all of the circumstances of the event's application.
Seattle's mayor just told you everything you need to know about where the modern left stands and who it stands against. And he's not even bothering to mask the bias, declaring that the Christian rally was far right and accusing it of being held for the express purpose of provoking the city's LGBTQ plus community. Not provoking violence, just provoking offense. That's the line now. If you say something true and someone claims they're hurt by it, you're the aggressor. The mob that surrounded Christians hurled abuse and sent a police officer to the hospital. That's an unfortunate footnote. The real problem, according to Harrell, was that people with biblical convictions dared to gather in public at all. Let that sink in, folks. The mayor of a major American city framed the peaceful, permitted Christian concert as an attack on the city's values, not because of any action taken, but because of the beliefs being held. That's not the language of a pluralistic society. That's ideological gatekeeping, and it's chilling. The First Amendment doesn't say you get to speak freely unless your views are inherently opposed to the mayor's worldview, but in Harrell's Seattle, that's exactly how it works. What's even more telling was his attempt to soften the optics around the Antifa violence by blaming anarchists for it, as if the problem wasn't the ideology, but a few bad apples who got a little too rowdy. That's the same excuse we've heard since 2020, when left-wing protests turned into riots and were hand-waved away as mostly peaceful. It's a pattern. Demonize the dissenters, excuse the chaos, and pretend the state is neutral. But Harrell's own words betray that neutrality. He said the rally violated the city's values, not the law, not public order, values, meaning disagreement is no longer allowed, not in word, not in presence, not even in prayer. This is what happens when government becomes a cultural enforcer, when elected officials stop seeing themselves as stewards of a shared civic space and start acting like ideological bouncers. What Harrell endorsed plainly is a two-tier system, one where secular progressive beliefs are granted institutional protection and Christian or conservative beliefs are treated as threats. That's not inclusion, that's authoritarianism in soft focus. Oh, and by the way, his final move, ordering a review of how the event was even allowed to happen, that's the real tell here. The event went through proper channels. It was permitted, peaceful, lawful, but it defied the cultural orthodoxy of the left. So now the system must be reevaluated, not to prevent violence, but to prevent dissent. This isn't governance, by the way. It's regime maintenance. And if you don't fall in line, the message is clear. You don't belong in the public square, and they will do everything they can to eject you in the most violent way possible. Oh, but the wokeness didn't stop at Seattle streets in the last couple of days. It's rearing its ugly head, as always, over at CNN.
Let's talk about Kamala Harris.
Makes me really concerned.
Let's talk about Kamala Harris.
As a black lesbian who Donald Trump doesn't believe has genes as good as his, is he going to attempt to exterminate me
why do you
when
believe
he gets
that, Aisha?
elected? Because he's damn near said it. That's why, David. That's why.
Because he's,
okay, and I'm not
has
going
he
to
said
be
that,
lectured by some white man who has no idea what he's talking about and is trying to rewrite history here.
Aisha,
I am
shame on
afraid,
you, Aisha.
as an American,
Aaron.
of a Donald Trump presidency, and his actual quotes
Shame
are
on you,
why.
Aisha.
Because I take him seriously, and I think that he believes what he says, and that is why he is a danger and a threat to America.
Jesus Christ.
Aaron, you can't have a
right,
rational discussion if someone doesn't want to talk about topics.
What we just witnessed on CNN wasn't a debate, it was a full-blown meltdown. An identity-fueled tantrum masquerading as moral authority. This guest confronted by a white man expressing a dissenting opinion, immediately defaulted to hysteria, invoking extermination, racism, and historical revisionism, all in the span of a few erratic sentences. No evidence to back any of it up, no coherent argument, just emotional theatrics wrapped in the language of social justice and broadcast on a major news network as if it were insight. This isn't journalism, it's activism and drag, and it tells you everything about where the American left is right now. And it's pathetic. And let's be honest, this kind of behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's the direct result of a decade-long campaign to replace reason with identity, dialogue with outrage, and facts with feelings. We were told this was progress. Amplifying voices, centering lived experience, challenging privilege, but all it's produced is a generation of pundits who can't tolerate disagreement unless it comes in the right color, gender, or pronoun. And when it doesn't, they melt down, accuse their opponents of genocide, and then blame the backlash on racism. The irony, of course, is that this tantrum wasn't triggered by any actual hate speech or offensive rhetoric. It was triggered by the presence of a white man calmly offering a different perspective. That's it. In today's media landscape, simply being a white male with a dissenting view is enough to be treated as a threat. And CNN, like most legacy outlets, doesn't just allow it, they reward it. They promote these meltdowns because the outrage economy pays. But in the process, they destroy any remaining credibility they have as a platform for real debate. See, what this moment reveals is that the left no longer believes in persuasion. They believe in performance. The goal isn't to win the argument. It's to make disagreement so radioactive that no one dares to try. That's why the rhetoric is always turned up to 11. That's why genocide and oppression are thrown around like buzzwords, because if everything is a moral emergency, then there's no time for nuance, no room for any sort of truth, and no tolerance for dissent. But here's a broader danger. This isn't just about one cable news meltdown. This is about a broader cultural shift where emotional fragility is treated as strength and victimhood is leveraged as political capital. It's about institutions from media to universities to corporate HR departments that have adopted this worldview wholesale, enforcing ideological purity and punishing anyone who challenges a script. And it's about a country where common sense is increasingly portrayed as cruelty and calm disagreement is framed as an act of violence. And we got here because too many people were afraid to say no, afraid to call this for what it is, manipulative, dishonest, and corrosive to any functioning democracy and discourse. But moments like this, where the mask slips and the rhetoric becomes too unhinged to ignore, are wake-up calls. They remind us that truth still matters, that facts still exist, and that we cannot build a sane, stable society on the shifting sands of identity, obsession, and performative outrage. The good news, though, is that more people are seeing through it. And no matter how loud this kind of meltdown gets, reality has a funny way of just breaking on through. Apparently, though, it hasn't broken through for Pete Buttigieg, who is still out here living in the Lulu land.
Look, I mean, there's, Democrats have created this impression, I think partly because of the way we feel and talk about Trump, have created this impression that translates into the way we feel and talk about people who supported him. And that's the thing that I think really is a cultural struggle in our party. There's this sense of condescension. I mean, if I hear one more time, like a well-off liberal doctor or lawyer saying, that quote unquote, these folks are voting against their economic interests, I just wonder whether they ever contemplated the fact that somebody could turn around and say, so are you. There's a condescension that is imputed to Democrats that I think we really need to deal with. So much of politics is not just how you make people feel, but how you make people feel about themselves. And so much of what they think of you comes down to what they think you think of them. And largely because of our very justified horror at the abuses of Donald Trump as a candidate and as a president. We've said and done things that make voters feel like we're talking about them when we're talking about him.
On the surface, Pete actually comes off a bit reasonable and grounded on common sense. A rare feat for a Democrat these days, but in reality, what he's offering here isn't any sort of accountability. It's just straight up damage control. Buttigieg isn't condemning the left's elitism. He's trying to repackage it. He's not apologizing for the open contempt Democrats have shown toward half the country. He's just upset it's bad optics. This isn't a reckoning. It's just a rebrand. And let's break down what he's actually saying, because he admits that Democrats have created the impression that they look down on Trump voters. by the way, an impression? No, Pete, that wasn't a mirage. That was Hillary Clinton calling them deplorables. That was Joe Biden saying Trump supporters are a threat to democracy. That was every late night host, academic, and legacy media outlet mocking middle America for being too Christian, too white, too armed, or too proud of their country. The contempt wasn't hidden at all. It was broadcast in 4K for everybody to see for literally years. Pete's trying to make this sound like a messaging problem, that if Democrats could just sound condescending, voters might come around. But the problem isn't how they talk, it's how they think. For years, the cultural elite has preached that if you're not on board with progressive orthodoxy, you're stupid, you're brainwashed, or morally defective. And now that this moral absolutism is backfiring, now that rural, working class voters are turning out in record numbers to vote against it, Democrats like Buttigieg are suddenly worried about how they make people feel. And to be clear, this isn't even about feelings, it's about power for the Democrats. The left built its coalition on the assumption that it owns the moral high ground and that anyone outside its cultural bubble is either an ignorant pawn or an existential threat. That worldview plays great on college campuses and Twitter, but it collapses the moment you try to run a country on it. You can't govern people you despise, and you certainly can't claim to represent all Americans when half of them know you view them as backward obstacles to progress. So what Buttigieg is actually revealing here, perhaps unintentionally, is that the Democrat Party is in the middle of an identity crisis. The old model of top-down moral lecturing isn't working anymore. The coalition of activists, bureaucrats, and media surrogates that carried them through the Trump years is no longer enough. They need the voters they spent a decade sneering at. But instead of changing their values, instead of meeting people where they are, they're trying to change the tone. Instead of questioning why so many Americans feel alienated by left-wing cultural dominance, they're scrambling to appear more likable without ever letting go of their actual disdain for regular working class Americans. In the end, Pete's comments don't signal reform, they signal fear. Fear that the political realignment we're living through is bigger than Trump, bigger than MAGA, and far more enduring than anyone in DC is ready to admit. Americans are waking up to the fact that the party of so-called tolerance has none, and no amount of smooth talk from Mayor Pete is going to unring that bell. Anyway, since we're on this topic, might as well make a stop by the View where common sense goes to die.
What I don't understand is, according to Kelly, he called John Kelly. He called these our soldiers losers and suckers. So why would they invite him to speak at West Point? And wearing the hat was a political move also. That shows you that
the commander-in-chief
politics.
Of the armed
hat is politics. It's not about anything but that. So he's supposed to be not political at West Point or Arlington Cemetery, and there he is being political and rambling. Jake Tapper needs to do another book. Because he was rambling, he's running around. I see pictures of him walking into walls.
You're not even joking.
The View is what happens when political propaganda is packaged as daytime TV and served up between commercials for antidepressants and skincare products. In less than a minute, Joy Behar managed to recycle a fully debunked hoax, smear Trump's mental fitness with zero evidence, and call for yet another partisan hit piece from Jake Tapper, all while defending 4 years of Biden's sundowning in HD. By the way, this isn't commentary, it's a televised group chat for the DNC. Now let's start with a suckers and losers claim, a story discredited by more than a dozen Trump officials who were with him at the time and said it never happened. Even former National Security Advisor John Bolton, no Trump loyalist, said it wasn't true. But that doesn't matter to the View because the truth has never been the point for them. The goal is repetition. Say it enough times and the audience starts believing it. This is the left's media strategy in a nutshell. Manufacture emotion, ignore correction, and never apologize for any of it. Then there's the absurd pivot to Trump's cognitive decline. These are women who spent years defending Joe Biden, whose public appearances often look like a hostage tape, now acting shocked that Trump, a 78-year-old man, might occasionally ramble like most people do. They're not concerned about cognitive fitness. They're concerned about narrative control. And the moment Trump looks coherent while Biden stares at a teleprompter like it's hieroglyphics, the panic steps in. Hence the call for Jake Tapper to write another book, which we all know just means CNN-approved fan fiction with footnotes. And it's ironic because the one time a CNN anchor actually tells the truth when it comes to this Democrat cover-up of Biden's cognitive decline, then all of a sudden it becomes an attack on Trump. When are you going to do it on Trump? You got to do it on Trump. Trump, Trump, Trump. He is worse than Biden. And here's the real kicker. Behind the scenes, their own producer, Brian Teta, reportedly told them to tone down the partisanship. You'd think that would trigger a moment of self-awareness in people like Joy. Instead, she's doubling down, because when you're a permanent resident in a media bubble, the only thing worse than being wrong is being off-brand. The View isn't about informing the public. It's never been about that. It's about reinforcing tribal identity. The facts are purely optional. The outrage is mandatory, and dissent is never welcome. What this moment actually reveals is the state of the American media industrial complex. Institutions that once claimed to hold power accountable now exist to protect it, so long as it wears the right colors. The View doesn't challenge the narrative, it recites it. It's not journalism, it's ideological performance art for people who think hashtags are policy and gossip is governance. This is where we are, folks. A culture so saturated with partisanship that daytime talk shows have become battlegrounds for misinformation dressed up as empowerment. But it's not working like it used to. The ratings are softening, the trust is eroding, and the public is slowly realizing that shrill talking points don't make the country better, just louder and more annoying to live in. The left's grip on narrative is slipping fast. And when the only tools left are shame, smears, and celebrity outrage, that's not a sign of strength. That's a sign of desperation.
It was about time we heard him give the Gold Star families their due. It was about time he did that, because he spoke and said, we're proud of our Gold Star families. This is the first time, at least maybe, unless you've heard him do it.
No, he's hosted them at the White House in his first term.
Right, but the last time we collectively heard him talking about Gold Star families, it was not positive.
Who could hear all that in the midst of all of that stuff?
I mean, I heard that because it was something that I needed to have him say. And for all the stuff that the supporting of military families is an issue that is embraced by both sides of the aisle.
Watching Whoopi cope is like watching a broken record try to remix itself. Loud, repetitive, and totally out of touch. This week's spin that Donald Trump has never given Gold Star families their due. Now, if you know even the slightest bit about Trump's presidency, or have access to a search engine, or just a person with a shred of a memory, you know that's blatantly false. He's hosted Gold Star families at the White House, spoken about them in both public addresses and personal statements, and honored their sacrifice repeatedly. But that doesn't fit the narrative The View clings to like a life raft in a sea of collapsing credibility, so Whoopi simply rewrites reality from scratch. This isn't just about a bad take on daytime TV, it's a case study in how the modern media class, especially on the left, rewires public memory in real time. They know most of their audience isn't going to fact check them, so they fill the vacuum with emotional certitude and historical amnesia. If Trump didn't cry on cue or read a eulogy written by a committee of consultants, then apparently it doesn't count. That's the bar now. Emotional theater over factual record. This moment also reveals a deeper problem, the selective sanctification of military families by the progressive media. When a Gold Star family criticizes Trump, they're hailed as heroes. When they speak positively of him, or worse, criticize a Democrat, they're ignored, dismissed, or just plain memory hold. The respect is conditional. It's performative. And it proves that for all their claims of unity and compassion, these pundits only elevate voices to serve their ideological agenda. This is how the left operates now, through curated outrage and selective memory. They're not trying to engage with facts. They're trying to create an emotional atmosphere where facts feel irrelevant. And that strategy is a key pillar of how they maintain influence over culture and public discourse, not through reasoned debate, but through repetition, shame, and strategic amnesia. But here's the good news. People are noticing. They're tired of the gaslighting. They're seeing the difference between who actually shows up for Americans and who just recycles the same talking points on daytime TV. And the more people like Whoopi try to rewrite the past, the more they expose just how hollow their present really is. So the question isn't just whether they're lying, it's why they need to. What kind of power depends on constant distortion? What kind of truth fears scrutiny? We're living in a moment where emotion is weaponized, memory is manipulated, and dissent is treated like heresy, not because the facts are unclear, but because they're inconvenient to the people shaping the narrative. So ask yourself, who benefits when you're told what to feel instead of taught how to think? When truth becomes conditional and honor becomes partisan, it's not just bad politics, it's cultural rot. And if we don't reclaim our ability to think critically, to remember clearly, and to question boldly, then we're not resisting it. We're just reinforcing it. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.